All right, welcome to those who've joined so far. We're going to give another minute before we kick things off, but certainly welcome to those who've joined early. We'll kick things off here in about 30 more seconds or so. All right, we're at the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and begin. So, welcome to everyone that's joining us for 5 success factors for digital transformation strategy. And I think that's the key part of this particular webinar is strategy. So we're going to be focusing on those strategic aspects of digital transformation. And you'll see very, very little about any sort of individual technologies or approaches or that tactical level. But we're going to dive into the law firm strategy pieces. And today, also, we'll be diving into Thomson Reuters Institute's research on this very subject, and also share why we've landed on these 5 success factors, both based on our research, as well as our experience working in the legal industry with this very subject. And throughout this webinar, we've also teed up a poll or two where we'll help each other understand each other a little bit more. But our goal at the end of the day is to give you 1 or 2 points that you can bring back to your firm that you can use almost immediately. But before we begin, we'd like to introduce ourselves. My name is Tom Snavely. I'm a principal for the Thomson Reuters Institute. And what I do is I partner with law firm leaders to turn Thomson Reuters Institute research into actions. And I joined Thomson Reuters Institute about 2 years ago. And from prior to Thomson Reuters Institute, I worked at a MLaw 50 law firm as part of their leadership team in their strategy and operations department. And what I do, as I mentioned before, is I'm an advisor to law firms. So I work with law firms, legal departments, and professional service organizations on strategic endeavors. And I'm joined here today with Zach.
Yeah, hey there, everybody. My name is Zach Warren. I'm the Technology and Innovation Insights Lead with the Thomson Reuters Institute. So as Tom mentioned, we're going to be going over some of the data, and a lot of the data comes from our digital strategy report, which just released, hot off the presses. I've been involved with that report since it's been ongoing, the data collection process and research process since the beginning of the year. I was the lead writer of that report as well. And overall, you'll probably see my name alongside a couple of other reports that TRI does, including anything ChatGPT and generative AI related, particularly recently. I just joined the Thomson Reuters Institute in August. Before that, I was editor-in-chief of ALM's Legal Tech News and been around the legal technology sphere getting close to a decade at this point.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. And this is actually a report that I've been looking forward to coming out, that one came out this week. So this particular webinar will dive deep into Zach and others' research into strategic aspects of digital transformation strategy. It's become such a hot topic over the last couple months. I frequently work with managing partners and interview them. And I would say that, somewhere around February or March of this year, managing partners became very, very interested in this type of research, especially around new innovation, digital transformation strategy, especially as ChatGPT became a thing. It just been quite profound. It was like turning a light switch on almost. But before we dive into that data and research that Zach has helped procure, I want to dive into a little bit more of the reasons why. So we wanted to do this particular webinar in the flavor of strategy, and also, not tech for tech's sake. But one thing that we do as a research organization is we understand our clients and buyer behaviors. So our long-standing research, in which we asked general counsel, how do you spend your budget money? And what we did was we asked general counsel, what are some of the aspects of how you spend? And what we started with, what's the typical firm? The typical firms that run-of-the-mill firm, no particular standout qualities. They said they would spend about 14% of their legal budget on that firm, which is quite eye-opening, as there's quite a lot of room for opportunity there. But we want to go a little bit further. And what we found was 7 additional ways to increase the proportion of spend a firm can get from their clients. Certainly diverse lawyers stand out lawyers, brand affinity, a formal client feedback program, industry experience, all these things up on screen here today. But the one we'll talk about more so is innovative approach. And what general counsel told us, those senior legal buyers, is that they would spend nearly double on a firm that they deem as innovative. So those firms that have those digital transformation strategies in place. And we'll skip to the next slide. So we didn't stop there. We also wanted to understand the client experience. And these particular, we wanted to make sure we showed these to you first, because it's not tech for tech's sake. These are what our clients are asking for. So we also try to understand a little bit more about client experience for those firms that general counsel have told us are innovative. And what you'll see across the bottom is some of those attributes of client service, such as satisfaction, quality, response, communication, and so on and so forth. And what we've done, we've plotted those run-of-the-mill firms in that gray bar on the bottom versus those firms that are deemed as innovative according to general counsel and other senior legal buyers in the orange bar. As you can see, those firms in orange performed much better with regards to their experience with those law firms. And I bulleted out a couple that just to kind of hone in on a little bit more, and those are relationships. We're looking at the bigger differences between the gray bar and the orange bar. So we're seeing relationships jump stronger. And that harkens back to one of the things that we'll talk about today with regards to understanding clients. These innovative firms appear to understand their clients quite a bit more. Commerciality, which is certainly related to relationships, and commerciality is that ability to give legal advice that not only reflects the understanding of the objectives, but giving legal advice in terms of objectives. And then value, I'll skip to that one. And that's oftentimes a fancy way of saying price. And we've done hundreds and maybe thousands of interviews with regards to client feedback. And anytime you're able to inch that up just a little bit more in the client's eyes, that is a feather in your cap. And then finally, all the way on the right-hand side, recommendation. So those firms that we're told that are innovative, they are achieving a 9.2 score out of 10 with regards to recommendation. So these are referrals. And also, this is where your clients are also becoming advocates for you. So now they are also mentioning your name to their peers. So we wanted to ground this with regards to this webinar with regards to the results. So these are some of the things that we're seeing based on our market research that innovative, those digital transformational firms are achieving with their clients. And now I'd like to pass it over to Zach to share more about the research that we've completed.
Yeah, certainly. And that's, I think, very important grounding, because like you said off the top, there's been a lot of talk about digital transformation and individual technology projects, how much firms are spending on technology, even under the pandemic, the move to virtual work and everything it takes to get that up and running. But that's not really what we're talking about here. We're not talking about individual technology fixes. We're talking about overall, not only technology strategy, but firm strategy. How exactly does your technology initiatives and digital transformation initiatives correspond with what the firm is doing overall? And how is there a marriage between where the firm wants to move into the future and the technology projects that it has? So with that in mind, when we were talking with different people across all different geographies about this, the people that we targeted weren't the technologists. And we did that very specifically because technologists, they live in the world of technology. They probably view it positively. The people that we wanted to talk to were the strategists, the financial officers, the revenue officers, the managing partners. I believe, so as you can see on the screen, we did 115 in-depth telephone interviews with law firm leaders across the world. And the two most common job titles that we talked to are managing partner and chief operations officer, very specifically to see, okay, these initiatives that you're doing, how does it bake overall into where the firm wants to be moving forward? As you can see, primarily talk to people in the US, Canada and UK and Ireland also well represented, but as you can see, have people from across the globe on this. So to get started, we're going to give you a quiz. Maybe not necessarily what you were expecting, but if you have a pencil and paper or something, the Word document to jot down some answers, These were the first 5 questions that we asked on our survey, and I thought it'd be helpful to bring them up here as well so you can kind of understand where we're coming from with this. So the very first one is, how important would you say digital transformation is to your firm currently? It ranges, as you can see, from central to overall firm strategy to of little to no importance. Similar question for number 2, but slightly different way of thinking about it. With respect to digital transformation, how do you compare to your peers? Is it market leading, more advanced than average, about average, all the way down to among the least advanced? Number 3, which of the following best describes your firm's current approach to digital transformation? Really, we wanted, are you more tactical? Do you hunt and peck, say, yes, that's something we have to fix, we're going to go fix it? Or are you trying to do it with an overall more strategic plan? Number 4, is reactive versus proactive. So are you waiting for a problem to arise, then you go and fix it? Or are you trying to anticipate problems and making sure that you fix those problems maybe even before they arise? And then finally, it's the how high level essentially is your strategy. So is there a defined strategy at the C-suite level, and how long has that been in place? So do you have your answers down? Have you written your A, B, C, D? Good. So what we did is we took all of those answers for everybody and we calculated what we call the digital strategy sophistication score. A little bit of a tongue twister there, DSSS. But what we did, so importance to firm, we said if it's central, gave it a high score, little to no importance, a 0. Did the same for market comparison. And you can score yourself along at home if you wrote down your own answers to this. Strategic versus tactical, maybe a little bit of a switch. We made A the 0 and B the 4 on this one, so heads up on that. Proactive versus reactive, the same. And digital transformation strategy. If they have one, it's a 4 or 3. If they're developing or considering, it's a 2 or 1. No overarching C-suite level strategy is a 0. And it's a reminder, these were done via interview, not online survey. So we didn't necessarily give them score out of hand. We asked them open-ended questions and then we scored them ourselves. But all in all, what we found is people felt pretty positively about their own digital strategy. All in all, people felt that they were strategic, they were proactive, it was highly important to the firm, and compared to the market, they felt well about it. As you can see with the distribution of scores, a large proportion, somewhere between that 15 to 18 out of 20 bucket. So all in all, with those 5 questions, this is what we saw. 83% gave themselves one of those 2 highest categories, either highly important, calling digital transformation either highly important or central to firm strategy. 49%, almost half, considered themselves to be above average or market leading. 71% said, yes, we take a strategic approach as compared to a tactical approach, where we are trying to approach problems from much more of a high level way as compared to an operational level. 82% said that they were proactive in looking to digitize whenever it makes sense to do so. And 54 currently have a defined digital transformation strategy at the C-suite level. Now, these are very optimistic views. As we go through, I may poke holes in 1 or 2 of these because there are some places that I think firms may say, yes, we're strategic, but are they actually strategic on the ground? That remains to be seen. It's also tough when 49% say they're above average or market leading. Well, not everybody can be market leading. So what exactly is the definition of market leading? That's something we're going to get to as we go through this as well. And some of the strategies that we've pulled out to actually be market leading and not just consider yourself very strategic and proactive when that may not be the case in reality.
And that helps tee up our first critical success factor, so being self-aware. So really understanding where your firm is at today. So we consider this to be the first step because we want firms to think a little bit differently. Taking off those rose-colored glasses perhaps is absolutely key. Making sure that you are open and honest about your firm's current state. Could your firm be more proactive or more strategic? And that's why that digital sophistication strategy score is so nice that we pulled out of our research. So feel free to use that as you go back to your firms, but also thinking about where you want to be. And that's a rather open-ended question, I recognize, but understanding your firm's current strategy as a whole, the firm-wide strategy, what is it? And then also, how can the digital transformation strategy help enable your firm strategy as you move forward? And some things to think about too is when I was at a law firm, I was helped create one of our first innovation programs is, not just looking at the legal industry, but taking a look outside the legal industry to understand a little bit more about where you could be, understand what technologies are being used in other service organizations or even manufacturing organizations, to understand a little bit more about are there things that you see out there that would help you gauge a little bit more about where your firm is at today. And at the end of the day, the firm just needs a really good place to start, and being self-aware is that first success factor.
I think that's a really good point. And as we go through some of the data here, I think that's something you'll really pull out of this is the idea of tying digital transformation to strategy is relatively new within legal, and taking cues from other industries that have done this, gone through this journey, is probably a good place to start to see, okay, not only do we want to be market leading as a law firm, but we want to be market leading in general, because that's what our clients are, and that's what they may expect of us as well. So diving into some of those numbers a little bit deeper, as you can see on the left-hand side, we categorized into 4 different quadrants, how people categorize their own approach to digital transformation and its relation to strategy. So the leaders, as you can see, a high proportion of people called themselves both above average compared to peers, as well as saying digital transformation is highly important to our firm. One thing we will note, though, not as many said market leading and central to firm strategy. So even though there's a high proportion of leaders, for the most part, people who answered us still think that there is a little bit of room to grow. There's also a pretty high proportion of what we call go-getters, which are people that say, yes, this is the way of the future. We want digital transformation to be central to our strategy moving forward, but we recognize we're not quite there yet. We have some room to grow. Maybe we're average compared to our peers. So we want to get better at this. And that's something that's going to be part of our strategy moving forward. The final quadrant I really want to highlight are those sticks in the mud, which that isn't the most flattering name, but I also think that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's people that call it moderate importance, they're average compared to their peers, but that means that there is room to grow, not only from the technology adoption standpoint, from the technology transformation standpoint, but from making sure that technology can be a differentiator moving forward. How exactly are you approaching that? Can the C-suite become more involved? Those are conversations that probably will be ongoing, particularly as technology continues to become more innovative and bake into legal practice moving forward.
And those sticks in the mud too, Zach. I think we've talked about this as we're developing this, is that they're perhaps more self-aware. Perhaps they're being more honest. They know where they want to be. Yeah. So that's one of the bright sides with regards to that bottom quadrant.
True. We also put on a quadrant the axes reactive to proactive and tactical to strategic, kind of like you saw in some of those opening questions. I found it interesting that 63% said, yeah, we're proactive and strategic. We attack things before they arise. We are doing so with an overall strategic plan. We're feeling good about this. The issue comes when we ask, okay, so is that strategy at a C-suite level? The answer is for many firms, not necessarily, or if it is, it's probably new. So particularly with the C-suite buy-in, very few have had it for even more than 5 years. You see those buckets, about 20% have had a strategy for 1 to 2 years, just over 15% have had it 3 to 5 years. Only 54% overall have any sort of currently defined strategy. What you see in the other end, there's a decent amount of people that are either considering or developing. Very few have no plans right now. But like I was saying off the top, and like Tom was saying a little bit, this is still nascent, this idea within law firms of making sure that everything we do from a digital transformation standpoint is tied to the overall firm strategy. And that means, as you'll see as we go through the data, that there is not a defined roadmap exactly for how to do this either. With so few people having done it for a long time within the profession, there are different ways and different measures of success that people have for their own internal strategies. So this is just pulling out a few of those numbers more concretely, that 70% of those who have a strategy have had it for less than 5 years. We also took a few quotes from those open-ended interviews. So there's a few reasons why people are focusing now on this. The pandemic was one that you might expect. Somebody who's had it 3 to 5 years, they've undergone a transformation where everything is digital, so it's easier to work remotely and collaborate. Even as law firms begin to move back into the office, or have begun to move back into the office on a limited basis, there's still a decent amount of remote work happening kind of across the board, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. I really like that right-hand quote too, though. It's really to remain competitive. We have to, is the short answer. So thinking about the idea of the tipping point, and once a certain percentage of firms have started to do this, then we start to see the tsunami. And I think we're starting to see the tsunami right now of firms realizing, even if we're not necessarily using technology as a differentiator for clients, it's becoming an expected part of the client service these days. It's especially with how many are in the developing stage or in the new stage, it's just kind of become standard operating procedure at many firms to tie digital transformation to overall strategy. So among those with a strategy, as I said, they feel pretty positively about how they've done overall. More than 75%, 77 to be specific, rated their firm success at a 7 out of 10 or above. But as you can see, a whole lot in that above average state, and either call themselves a 7 or an 8. Only 8% of respondents gave themselves a 10 out of 10. So again, people feel good about the way their digital transformation corresponds to strategy, but still realize there is some work to do. And then just a few words, because I figure if you're on this webcast, you probably either have a strategy in place at the C-suite level or are either considering or developing. So I'm not going to take too much time about those that don't have a strategy currently in place, but these are some figures that we pulled out from that 46% that either have no interest in it, are still considering, or are currently developing. Overall, their digital strategy sophistication score tended to be a little bit lower, but not super low, still an 11 out of 10. A decent amount of those, I found it interesting, that don't have the C-suite level strategy still believe that they take a strategic and proactive approach to things, or at least they try. 58% say, yes, we're more strategic than tactical in the way that we approach digital transformation. And 75% said, yeah, we're still more proactive than reactive. I say all this to say that it shouldn't be considered a failure if you don't have digital transformation tied to strategy at the C-suite level. There are a lot of digital transformation initiatives that are much more operational in nature, don't necessarily need to be a part of strategy. They can be very successful staying at that operational level. But when we're looking at the overall way of the firm future and how they want to be approaching these problems, not everything can be covered at the operational level. You need to have that top-down buy-in and to have an overarching strategy in some cases to make sure that everything is being covered. So in a way, I don't want to say that people who don't have a defined strategy, that's the wrong way to go about it. But I do want to say that as we move into the future, I expect to see more and more firms moving into the defined strategy way of approaching things. And similarly, firms that don't have a digital transformation strategy mainly are in two camps. One, they are probably going too soon. They're at the beginning of the process. Either they're in the consideration or active development phase. The other sort of bucket that we see are people who are taking things on a case-by-case approach. Typically, that last quote is one that we heard a few times. It's driven by partners, not necessarily on an individual basis, or sometimes even on a practice area basis, but there's no cohesion between the practice areas. How exactly these different digital transformation initiatives are approached. And then in terms of what we're seeing for those who don't have a strategy, 43% of those say they're currently developing, and the majority of those say, yes, we're probably going to have something within the next 6 to 12 months. So within the next year, I'd expect that proportion of those that have the digital transformation initiatives tied to overall firm strategy to heavily increase. Among those that are still maybe or definitely are not, it's usually not yet. The firm has more pressing issues to focus on. There is also an element of lack of budget, lack of buy-in from partnership as well. So with that 46% saying that they don't have one, do the basic math, 54% do currently have a digital strategy at the C-suite level. As you can see, their average sophistication score, a 16 out of 20, but just 4 firms scored themselves a perfect 20 out of 20. 35% say digital transformation is central, the highest level to firm strategy. And then strategic and proactive approach, those who have the strategy pretty overwhelmingly say they have a strategic and a proactive approach to this. One thing I am seeing, so I'm sharing my screen, so I can't necessarily see the chat. Tom, if there are questions in the chat that you would want me to bring up, more than happy to answer anything. But yeah, just let me know that one if you could.
So we've arrived at our next critical success factor, and that's establish accountability. So if you could, sir, if you could launch the poll real quick. So this is where we're going to get a little more interactive and understanding each other just a little bit more. So the question was, who was involved in your strategy formation, and if you could select all that apply. And we'll take a second or two as the answers come in, and but as we're waiting for the answers coming in, so establishing accountability is not something that happens overnight, and we recognize that, and changes as the firm strategy evolves over time. But when we look at the firm's current state, the most critical things that we dig into is who is responsible. And I think the old saying goes strong here, is that if everyone's responsible, then maybe no one is responsible here. And I'm wondering at this point if we have some good responses on the poll. Oh, there we go. So we have a good range. So C-suite, executive committee comes up first and second, and then partners too, and as well as managing partners and external consultants. So that's fantastic. So we're seeing a lot of folks on the webinar that have that C-suite accountability as well as the executive committee. The one interesting part is managing partners, and I bring this one up is that it's high on the list for sure. But we do the same thing for managing partners. And when we ask the question sometimes about responsibility, we see that dispersing out, meaning that not necessarily the managing partners consider themselves to be responsible for that digital transformation strategy. So we could drop the poll for a second. Thank you for that. But for any sort of strategic initiative, finding that focused accountability is what firms are striving for, and it's key. It's not to say that others in the firm should not have objectives linked to digital transformation, but it's clearly important to strive towards that clear accountability point. And Zach, if you could take us off to the next set of research.
Yeah, certainly. So to that end, we asked people the same question: who all was involved in developing your strategy? And as you can see, partners and business services functions, definitely high up there, associates and other lawyers. But some of the ones that I want to focus on were near the end. Peer firms, comparing yourself against the marketplace, only about half did so. Current clients and target market, even less than that, which I found rather interesting. And that's going to be a recurring trend as we come through this as well, is the idea really of a law firm is to make clients happy. And part of what you're doing with anything with your firm strategy is supposed to be geared toward client service. But a lot of times digital transformation initiatives aren't necessarily taking clients into account. So if you're trying to marry digital transformation to clients, why aren't clients a part of developing that strategy? Why aren't, as you'll see in a few slides, feedback being collected from them? It's something that I think a lot of firms could do a little bit better on, or at least take into account a little bit more. But we'll talk about that as we go through. So overall, we also asked, essentially, is the digital transformation strategy a stated part of overall firm strategy, or is it a separate initiative? So once again, this is firms who claimed, yes, we do have a strategy, but a lot say it's a strategy that is over here. It's set apart a little bit from the overall firm strategy, where it's important to us and it's related to the firm strategy, but it's not directly stated within the firm strategy. Also, we asked who has ownership of the overall digital transformation strategy, and typically it was the tech department, chief technology officer or the equivalent, so chief innovation officer, what have you. About half said overall ownership. About 29% said managing partner, CEO. About 24% said chief operating officer. One thing I also want to note here, you'll notice that those percentages don't add up to 100. It is over 100. So in some cases, people said it is multiple people who have overall ownership of the strategy, which you could make the argument, if it's multiple people having ownership, then nobody really has ownership. So I think that's something that some firms will have to shake out as well, is there a person or even a group function area that the buck stops with for this sort of thing? If you're tying digital transformation and saying you're being proactive, you're being strategic about this, is there a person that is leading that effort and making sure that it comes to fruition? Maybe it's a little bit more murky than some firms would like to admit. And part of that is who has mandatory objectives linked directly to digital transformation strategy. So for the most part, it is executive directors, as you can see, COO, CFO, about 58% of the time, 58% of the firms that we talk to, executive director of some sort has a mandatory objective linked to the strategy. IT function up there as well. But especially for, at the beginning, partners, associates were part of forming the strategy, but they might not necessarily have buy-in throughout the entirety of the strategy. Only 25% of managing partners have mandatory objectives linked to digital transformation strategy. For partners, only 22%. For associates and other lawyers, only 10%. So that tells me that a lot of firms want to get the buy-in from, or want to get the attorneys in on the ground floor. They want to talk to them and help develop the strategy, but there's no reason for attorneys necessarily to buy in throughout the entirety of the process, which may, if you're really trying to tie it into this is the way of the future, it is highly important or central to firm strategy, I would think you would need partners and other lawyers involved. Similarly, feedback mechanisms, as you can see on the left-hand side, only 56% have a structured mechanism to get feedback on progress from its people. Only 34% have that structured mechanism to gain feedback from clients. So it's also a question of, if you're trying to measure this and measure success, how exactly are you getting the data to do so? And what are you linking those mandatory objectives to? It can be a little bit nebulous of some firms saying, we think our digital strategy is working well because we feel like our digital strategy is working well. It's a little bit of circular logic. So that gets me to the beginning point of, a lot of people are feeling good about this, but when push comes to shove, what are they basing that on? Not a lot of firms necessarily have hard metrics to measure right now just how well digital transformation initiatives are linking to firm strategy. So in the open-ended question, we asked, what are some of the goals for your digital transformation strategy? And there were a wide variety, but a few different key buckets that we teased out, both for the next 12 months and the next 3 to 5 years. A lot of that tends to be with current technology that they already have within the walls. So how can we increase usage of already implemented technology? How can we improve its capacity, its uses, integration with other technology? Also see a little bit about buying new technology, explore and integrate AI is on both buckets here. But one I want to pull out is number 2 on both. Further integrate technology to improve client service. Once again, this is a stated goal of most firms to have client service front and center with digital transformation strategy. But in terms of how people are executing that with client service in mind, it's a lot aren't necessarily gaining the feedback to know whether or not they are reaching that goal. So alongside that, what metrics is the firm using to measure success? It's kind of all over the board: efficiency, usage, revenue profit base, ROI, particularly those that have a high digital sophistication score. Utilization, so usage and efficiency, are 2 of the ones that we see most often, particularly time saved. These are probably easier to measure in a lot of firms as well, which is why that may not surprise me as much. A lot of technologies these days automatically track usage rates. Efficiency, probably a little bit tougher, but it's probably time-based, especially non-billable time-based is what we see a lot of the time. And then revenue profit-based is baked into that as well.
So that brings us to our next critical success factor, and that's build buy-in. And this one almost goes without saying, but it's so very important. Partnerships are very much a very different beast when it comes to implementing anything in digital technology. Transformational digital technology is certainly the case as well. So without the buy-in in your strategy, you could be stalled before you begin. So in a second, we'll show you our approach to digital transformation strategy as well as firm strategy formation. And honestly, it's really about the journey, meaning that it's the people involved, the firms that I've worked for and with. We set up working teams with regards to building a strategy. And those teams are so very critical. They're handpicked, oftentimes by the managing partner or the executive committee. We want to make sure that we've got a good range of folks that are across practices, across different geographies, as well as associates versus partners as well too. And I know every firm's different, but do consider the team that you're forming when you're approaching this. But it's absolutely critical. They need to be along for the journey. They need to take each step, and we'll show you some of those steps here at the end of this presentation. But they're deeply involved with this, and also we want to make sure that we find those I call them angels, but those are the partners that love and already do some of the things that are transformational technology and innovative. For example, you certainly want those people on your teams, but also don't forget the dissenters, those that may not be totally on board with regards to a change in the way that they approach their practices. So don't forget them, because you'll be able to convert some of those dissenters into believers. It's a huge endorsement for your as your strategy moves forward. And one tip, and this goes for not just digital transformation strategy as well, but any sort of change initiative. One thing that we always did and do is that establish up front, set the expectation up front with your working team that, hey, communication is a big part of your role. And very specifically for the projects that I've worked on, making sure that the partners as well as the associate that could be on your working team know that, ask the question, set it up early as you kick off the project. If we do good things for you, if you see some positive gains, make sure that you communicate these to the wider partnership, because we all know that partners can speak to other partners in ways that staff members and operations folks simply can't. But it's a key part of any sort of change initiative. One story that I have is we did an innovative project with regards to a large litigation project, and I asked that question up front, and the partner was very receptive, and he remembered it, and he talked to the partnership about the gains that we made, and even there was an innovation award program that was at the firm I worked for, and he said, "We're going to win that." And I looked at him. That's great, but he did actually push it forward so that we did win that small innovation award. But the idea behind it was that making sure that the folks know that are on this working team, for example, that they know that a big part of the role is communication and sharing what they've learned and why the direction we're going, which leads us to our next set of research.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, because especially when people think digital transformation, technology, innovation, your mind goes to the hard skills, the software, the implementation, the IT of it all. But one thing that we found from people that have undertaken this and had some lumps, but also had some successes, is that often the soft skills were really what was most important, not only to try and overcome, but ultimately turned out to be those biggest successes as well. So for the most part, law firms approach this with change management and internal communication in mind. As you can see, 69% included a change management program as part of the implementation of their digital transformation strategy. 74% included a structured internal communication program. Very important, I think, to the firms who did so, to make sure that those were part from day one, but also a lot of times carried out through the entire implementation and overall continued strategy as well. There are a bunch of different ways looking at communications that people did that. So at the practice office department level, so downstream communications, about 3/4 did so. Intranet, the same. Firm-wide emails, the same. Partner conferences I found interesting. 70% said at the launch of our digital transformation strategy, we had a partner conference to make sure that all of our partners were on board and trying to think about this in a new way. But as the strategy continued, in terms of internal progress updates, you still see those communications at the practice officer department level. You still see firm-wide emails. You start to see the partner conference start to tick down a little bit, though. 11 fewer percentage points, 59% said partner conferences were still ongoing to make sure that people knew how digital transformation was being tied to strategy. And I think that's kind of reflective of what we saw with the objectives earlier as well, that attorneys, partners, managing partners, very involved at the beginning, at the formation, at forming how digital transformation will be tied to strategy. But in terms of actually carrying that out, it tends to be much more the tech people, business directors, not necessarily the attorneys themselves.
I think that was on the previous slide. That was one of the things that really popped out when you started showing off this data, Zach, was the change management. Even those two words that came out of this particular form of research was kind of shocking for me as a person that's worked for a law firm for a dozen years. that term wasn't used very much. And this was very much a corporate word, change management. But in some of the data that you have in the background too, we're seeing roles that were, transformation department roles, which was pretty wild to me because it's taking some of those best practices from the corporate environment and bringing them forward to the legal environment. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I was talking actually with some of our analysts in the Minnesota office yesterday about that exact thing, where it's a lot of different job titles depending on the firm. So some will have chief innovation officer, some will have that function rolled into chief operation officer. There's chief CTO at some points, but all of them, no matter who it is, there seems to be some sort of awareness that if you're going to do something in terms of technology, it's not just the tech piece itself, it's that tripod, people, process, and technology that I think some technologists are sick of hearing about, but people in the wider firm are starting to wake up to for the first time to say, oh, that makes sense that we need to consider all three of those things in any sort of initiative that we do. So talking again about some of the biggest challenges, it really is engagement and buy-in that turned out to be number one. Making sure that you're getting people on board with what you're doing and you're not just preaching to the choir a lot of times. I feel like some technologists, some people in IT, some people in operations as well tend to think, all right, we're doing our job, but why isn't everybody else making sure that this is tying to the overall firm strategy and we're cohesive on this? I really like that last quote. It is not sexy work. Getting people to understand this is a necessity to survive has been hard. And that was definitely something that we heard over and over again, pretty much no matter who we talk to. It's the other ones probably wouldn't surprise you too much. Resources, just making sure that not only do you have the people behind it, but you actually have the money and time. A lot of people particularly throw money at the beginning of a process, but don't necessarily sustain it. But if you're saying that this is central or highly important to overall firm strategy, then that's something that probably needs to be maintained through. Also see finding solutions. There are a lot of legal technologies out there. So making sure that you're tying this into firm strategy in a way that is right and actually will be sustainable moving forward. And then scope. One person said simply, biggest challenge, thinking too big. Starting with those small wins can be extremely helpful. But of those who had the strategy, they not only said engagement buy-in was the biggest challenge, but also the biggest win. 43% said, yeah, once we actually went through the process, actually getting people on board, it felt good. It felt like we actually accomplished something. And I think we heard over and over again, not necessarily for tying digital transformation to strategy, but future initiatives within the firm too, people thinking about strategy in a different way, not necessarily, oh, I need to acquire clients like me for my expertise, that's and then I'm going to try and get as many billable hours as possible, but thinking about how to differentiate yourself or differentiate the firm from other firms. There are new ways to do it. You can do it through technology. You can do it through client service, and client service expertise is a part, but value is also a part, responsiveness is a part, which also ties into technology. There are different ways to get people to think about this stuff, and getting engagement and buy-in on a digital transformation initiative can be a way to get people on board with other initiatives as well. And then the tech piece is, as expected, infrastructure 20% and efficiency 13% were the biggest wins as well.
Exactly right. We were talking about this as we were looking at the research, and Zach's observation with the biggest challenge and the biggest reward is engagement buy-in. And we both reflected on, we knew where we were, at our law firms, or where we're at when we got that first steps of buy-in with partnerships. It felt so good. And it was something that we could move forward with and share a story to build further buy-in. So that one in particular, when Zach pointed that out, was a really kind of a clean and nice nice way to think about these things. I suspect everyone on the phone also does recognize when they got a key piece of a change management strategy or initiative that is a little different than normal where you were, or when you got that yes or that building block or the next step towards yes. But I just wanted to reflect on that point as we
Yeah,
move forward.
I appreciate that. So once again, client value also key in this. We talked about client value a lot, and Tom, you'll take it away for even more.
Sounds good. Yeah. So our next critical success factor is client value is absolutely key, and it's something that should be front and center. So ensuring that value of that client is dominant, and so always keeping your clients in mind. One thing to take into consideration when you start your digital transformation strategy or reflect on it or move it towards its next step is looking at your responses from your firm's client feedback program if you have a formal program. This is a key piece. The firm I work for, as well as the other firms that I've worked for, reflecting back on what clients have told you directly is absolutely important. It will help you frame up where you're going. And also, it provides really good, important quotes to help move the firm forward. When a client says something, for most law firms are so client focused, that does turn eyes. It also helps you understand a little bit more where your focus could be at, where you can add value to your clients, where some of their challenges are, and being able to position it in form of value towards your clients. I think that's one thing that we do ask in our client feedback programs is, we tend to ask, what's most important, but we also do ask if they consider on a 1 to 10 scale, do you consider your firm to be innovative? So, consider adding that to your client feedback program, should you have one that's more formal. And interestingly, I recently did a roundtable for general counsel, and we did some pretty cool things on behalf of a firm, and we talked about their spend, their work mix, how they made decisions, some of the key things that are confronting them. But once we started talking about digital transformation strategy, the room just started talking more and more about these things, where they were understanding, what the risks, what are the impacts. And interestingly enough, one of the points was that came out of this group of general counsel was that they believe, and this was kind of overwhelming, that law firms should be helping them understand these new and emerging technologies and strategies towards them, which was kind of eye-opening. So taking that from a little bit from the client perspective as well, is that those general counsels, those senior legal buyers, are really looking towards law firms to help them unpack and understand some of these new technologies. But going back to the key point of this slide, it's the value you bring to your clients. It's not tech for tech's sake. It's how you are helping them in their departments and their corporations to move forward. And I like to reflect on one of the things that we talked about as a firm with regards to innovation. And for example, when you purchase something large like a car, are you concerned? Are you how it's made? You may think about ethical considerations, but do you care that it's made by robots? But you're more concerned about the value that you get out of that particular car. And the law firm services is generally that way as well too, which moves us to our next subject, Zach.
Yeah, I'll go through this quickly, but really just highlighting that what people want to see out of the digital transformation initiatives tied to strategy is mainly efficiency, but also client service. Not only efficiency in terms of time spent and improving quality of the work, but being able to pass that on as well and create overall client service and overall client satisfaction. Really, there were 44% that highlighted efficiency, also highlighted the client service piece. They're really married. And I think that quote puts it well, that's up there. It's really about being more efficient at what we do, whether that is internally among us at the firm or being more efficient for clients. Overall, it is going to make us better at what we do. So it's just something to keep in mind as either whether you have a new strategy or you're developing one, considering one, that really should be top of mind is what is my end goal for this? What do we want to accomplish? And then do we need to bring in more people either at the beginning of the process, throughout the process? How are we adjusting our end goals? How are we adjusting how exactly we're rolling this out to the firm? That's probably something firms need to be considering.
which help us go to the next and last critical success factor, which is developing a strategy. And in a second, I'll show you the approach that we often take. There's many ways to go about this, but one thing that we really wanted to talk about on this particular last and final success factor is that creating a strategy that fits your unique aspects of your firm and revisit it. So no matter where you are in your journey, making sure that you have a strategy and make sure that you take a look at it periodically to make sure it's correct and you're on the same path. Make it easy to understand. And we also really want to make sure we talk about making sure your digital transformational strategy really does support the overall firm strategy. So for example, if your firm focuses on a specific set of clients or a certain set of geographies or other, making sure that your digital strategy does support that. And of course, this is not without challenges. So what we have up on screen is one of the ways to approach digital transformation strategy. And we broke it down into phases. And you're going to see many of the critical success factors that Zach and I talked about with regards on this particular approach. And really it's the journey. If that's one thing that you get out of this slide, it's really the journey. And the number one thing that we do is we want to make sure that there's a working team of key individuals for that firm, and they're along for the entire ride, making sure that they're hand selected, the right groups. We talked about some of those aspects of those folks. We want to make sure there's advocates, dissenters, but a good cross section across the firm, because they're going to work through all those different steps here that we have laid out. And they're going to be the sounding board and make sure that the firm is on the right path. But that first step, ambition and current strategy. So understanding the current firm strategy, making sure that we know it well, understanding ambition. Where do we want to go with with a digital transformation strategy? Perhaps using a digital strategy sophistication model would be a good place to start to understand where you sit. Challenges. What competitive challenges do you face? And this is where we talked about, making sure client views are involved. So making sure you're going back, looking at your client feedback program, perhaps doing additional client interviews, also industry research. Third step is strategic options. And the working group will unpack and understand a little bit more internally. So it's internal reflection, perhaps doing some internal interviews, understanding polling, understand what's going on currently, and also understanding clients, understanding what they are interested in, and also some of the challenges that you're facing, perhaps with the financial performance. And then working through a competitive advantage model, which I'm happy to share with you. Just reach out to us. And how do you understand the impacts that you make? So filtering through ideas with this working group team, how do we fit? Where do we fit? How does it fit with regards to our brand, our approach, our firm-wide strategy? And please note, the next step is far from the beginning, formation of strategy. So it's really that journey, because we do want to make sure folks are on board. We do want to make sure we got clients involved and their views are involved. We have a strategy formation model that we work through. And honestly, this is one of the ones I wish I would have had years ago, because it does take a little bit of the aspects that we found on our way, but it puts them in one area. So as you're working towards that strategy, thinking about accountability is one step. And each one of these, the working team should look at and listen to and find ideas to how to best approach where they're at today. So making sure that accountability, perhaps at at the right level, and every firm is going to be different. Knowledge and sharing. Are there mechanisms that we have in place to allow for sharing, telling those good stories, and understanding where we can also do good work with regards to digital transformation? Last one on the bottom right corner is the engagement across the firm that's constantly changing. I think Zach had a good slide of many of the things that we work through with regards to how to engage the partners, how to engage different parts of the organization. But that's a consistent thing to continue to look at. Investment and resourcing. I think that was one of our biggest milestones and also milestones for the other projects that I work on. When you get money, when you get a budget, you can actually do things and do things when you're not trying to scramble for money, but having a budget set aside. Functional administrative support, where you're at in your journey. That could be a full team, it could be a smaller team. Depends on what your strategy that you form will be, but making sure you have support. And then finally, although it's probably the last one here, it's the most important one, integration with the firm strategy. that firm-wide strategy. We're not just talking about the digital transformation strategy, making sure that it fits with the firm. So certainly do reach out to us if you'd like to learn more about this particular approach that we do. And we'll move to the next slide, and we're almost done. So here they are. Here's the critical success factors that we put together today based on our research. And we hope we hope that you have found these to be interesting, and perhaps backed up with our research and data that gives a little bit more of a chance for you to invigorate your firm with regards to the next steps for your digital transformation strategy. And as we move to the next slide, Zach and I just wanted to make sure that that we're available for you. So please do reach out to us if you'd like to learn a little bit more about our research for sure, and also anything that we've done with firms. So please do reach out to us if you have any questions.
And I will note too that this full survey as of Monday is up on the Thomson Reuters website. So just search digital strategy report, maybe digital strategy report TRI, and it will come up. And yeah, highly encourage any questions, as like Tom said, can always reach out our way.
And thank you much for joining us. And we're open for questions right now too. So.